We can just play games instead if you like. There are plenty of good Sky games.
We are live.
Welcome, everyone, to our fourth session of Inspired Empowerment. I'm Josette Agarwal, your host, and today we have with us Elan Gepner-Dales, and he is a former filmmaker, producer, and actor. He graduated summa cum laude from Brown University. He's also the founder of Building Blocks Project to bring arts into schools. He's served as a consultant for the Philadelphia public school system. He's given presentations at universities such as Wharton School of Business and Harvard. And he's currently the executive director for Sky Schools, which is an initiative under the International Association for Human Values. Welcome, Elan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. A joy to be here with you.
So you've done quite a bit of work with public schools and nonprofit organizations. Is there anything in particular that inspired you with your upbringing or at some point of your life to do this type of work?
Yeah, many things. And I think it continues to happen. My upbringing was not geared towards education as a passion. I think the arts were a passion of mine, but growing up in Philadelphia, I grew up in a very beautiful and fascinating community called Germantown. Oh, here's a picture of me in Switzerland. And so I had this very interesting, joyous childhood where I got to go back and forth between Germantown, which is a wonderful working class community in Philadelphia, and the Swiss Alps on one side. And in Philadelphia, I think I had a really firsthand view of inequality. I think that's what really guided my journey. You see that little baby in the mountains was probably a pretty unique experience for my neighborhood. I think I remember only, African-American kids in my community, and I don't think a single one of them had the opportunity to go to Switzerland nonetheless, but to private schools that I went to. And I went to this amazing school called Miquon when I was in elementary, that was out in the woods, and we had chickens and we had a bamboo forest. And so my experience was this really, oh, you have a picture there too. Yeah, so this is out in Miquon playing King of the Mountain on the mud hill there. I'm the rude kid sitting on his friend. So that's not good promotion for my kind service heart there and being a jerk. But I had this incredible privilege to go play in the woods and get dirty, and then come home to my beautiful community and play in the street and play football. But I think I didn't realize the access that my education gave me until actually after school, until I graduated from university. I got to go to an amazing Ivy League university on scholarship, and came back a filmmaker to my neighborhood. And I started looking for some of my friends to see where people were. And one of my best friends was in prison. Another I couldn't find. And to this day, I haven't gotten definitive answers of where he is, but I did hear that he was killed. And I don't know if that's 100% the case. But yeah, and then the one person I really was able to find from my neighborhood had 3 kids. So here I am, I'm 22, I'm back from school, ready to go start a career as a documentary filmmaker and save the world with all these grand ideas. And I realized in my neighborhood, the reality for most of the kids who I grew up with was totally different. And so I went and I looked at the school where they went, and my neighborhood high school, Germantown High School, it's actually been shut down since then. But it was in many ways a prison. You walk through 3 sets of metal detectors, all the windows had bars on them, and it was just 2 blocks away from Germantown Friends School, the I think at that time it was rated top 10 in the nation in academics, this private Quaker school. And I just had so much privilege, and I hadn't realized that. And so it made me really ask, okay, what's happening in our public schools? And I started going in and asking that question. This was right during No Child Left Behind. And the response I got was, we don't have arts. We don't have, the principal was saying, we don't have extracurricular activities for our kids. And it kind of broke my heart, because I think if I hadn't had arts, if I hadn't had sports and other opportunities for outlet in my life, I don't think I would have made it through high school. There were so many challenges I was dealing with, and that was really my release, my safe space. So I realized, I now know this. I have to be part of the solution. I can't take this insight and just blindly go about my life. So that's probably at the base of it.
It's a story that we hear across the nation, and it is heartbreaking. You're very aware of your privilege, as you've shared, and the inequities happening. But can you share also perhaps a challenge that you went through at some point in your life, and maybe how that shaped you?
Yeah. So again, many, but it's interesting. So you saw a few pictures of me in Switzerland and in elementary school, happy and playing. And I was this really happy kid. I think every area of my life was quite blessed when I was young. I had so many friends around in each environment, in my community, at school. But then I had kind of a pretty hard shift when I turned 11. I had a friend of mine who was not even one of my best friends, but a friend in my school. We had very small classes, like 18 students. So you knew everybody. And he was a grade below me. And he passed away from leukemia, which is, of course, sad, and you lose a friend. It's heartbreaking. But for me, it was kind of a big break in my view of the world. I don't think I had lost a pet beforehand, but I had never lost a loved one, and I'd never really contemplated death in that way. And it kind of sent me into a deep depression, in many ways, a kind of existential crisis as an 11-year-old of what's going on, what's the purpose here. So it's a deeper story to get into all of that, but it really was the onset of years and years of depression. And I managed it just by throwing myself into joy and hedonism and success, and do everything, have every experience, try to get as much joy out of life. But it left me kind of in this work hard, play hard cycle that was just burning me out. And so I would always fall back into the depression. It was never, ever really filling anything in. And that continued throughout high school, throughout college, and in my early 20s. I think it was finding service. It was really going into my neighborhood school and realizing, all right, we all have our problems, but other people are really hurting. What are you doing? And showing up for others and being of service to others, that started to really bring me out of it. But still, until I found other tools, it remained. So I finding a way to heal was a big part of my journey.
Yeah. So many people within the world of activism or service or teaching, trying to create reforms, burn out. And, as a school teacher of 20 years, I've seen a lot of burnout amongst my colleagues. And when you look at the issues going on today in public schools, and if you want to create a positive change, it can be overwhelming. What led you, first of all, to kind of shift from bringing arts into schools to bringing meditation into schools? And what advice might you give to somebody who's wants to make a positive change, but is maybe overwhelmed by that, or facing some issues of burnout?
I think that, the shift in me, it came out of just sharing what worked, right? So throughout my adolescence and into my early 20s, the arts were, as I said, kind of life-saving for me. I don't think if I had film and theater and poetry, I necessarily would have gotten through those years. There were many years of my life where living didn't really seem worthwhile, where it was so exhausting that with all of the joy I had in my life, the amazing parents, so many blessings, like countless blessings, and still amidst that, when you're depressed and when there's no energy there, it doesn't matter. And so the arts were a refuge for me. And so when it came to being of service for others, that's what I went to. I went to sharing the tools that allowed me to reflect and find space and find some peace. And yeah, and then here we have the Sri Sri Center for Peace and Meditation. The arts took me so far, but if I still was burning out. I was burning out attempting to find solutions for everyone and to heal everyone, and I was exhausted. And so it wasn't really until I found meditation that I was able to refill the tank genuinely. The arts would be therapeutic in a moment, but it was when I was able to meditate every single day that suddenly I was able to go into the same insanely stressful situations and show up for people with my 100%, and have the energy. And the stress would come, but it just wouldn't stick in the same way. And this was such a revelation. And so I had to say, well, is this only me, or is this really a tool that works for folks? And so I brought it to other peers who were educators and to students. And so many people had this profound shift in their life where, using specifically breathing practices that give a lot of energy and remove a tremendous amount of stress, people were able to show up so much happier, so much calmer, so much more focused. And so I switched what I was giving. I had been giving arts, and I said, no, this is really the secret sauce. The arts for me had never been about training professional artists. I was more and more not interested in being a professional artist myself. It was always more about that healing and giving the tools that are most effective to others. And as you asked about what would I share for someone who's in that position, and I would just say, as educators, as caretakers, when we're called to do service work, you're giving and giving and giving and giving. And how much can you give without just being empty? And so the most generous thing that I've figured out I can do for the world is to fill my cup. And that's what I would offer to another. If you know that you want to give 110% every day, then how do you fully fill yourself up each morning, each evening, so that you remain juicy? Because if we can't fill ourselves up in that way, we become dry and exhausted, and our best intentions don't give the best to others because we don't have the resources. So it starts with ourselves. It's like the airplane analogy of putting your mask on first. And I know that's used commonly, but to really have tools that do that keep you vibrant and keep you excited and able to go back into really difficult situations day in and day out with your best, is the best you can do.
Now, you mentioned that when you were a child, you had a very happy childhood, and then you kind of hit a bump in the road, and that sent you spiraling into a darker place. And I think, a lot of teenagers, a lot of children, once they hit adolescence, they hit similar bumps in the road, start questioning, why to even continue. What advice would you give to maybe a teen who doesn't have a lot of resources and is struggling?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would do is listen. And this is something that I think we all can do as educators, is really listen. And I think often there isn't that space to be heard as a young person and to really process everything that's coming up for you. So that's one thing, is to really hear, because every person is different, and what they're dealing with is different. But we keep changing and growing is a perspective you don't have when you're young, right? The moment is so real. And so another thing that as an adult you can do is empathize genuinely and share. So one thing I often do is share my experience. Now that isn't a solution for anyone, but it's to let a young person say, I feel you and I've been there. Maybe it was a little different, but I've been there and it's hard and I totally hear you and feel you. And things can change. So that little bit of hope is actually profoundly powerful. I remember I had a teacher who once asked me, one teacher who really did listen to me and said, okay, I see that on some days you're bright and then I see on other days you're really not here, you're hurting. What's going on? And I opened up to this teacher and he said, okay, you feel like this, but will you always feel like this? Do you see yourself at 20 years old feeling like this? And I was like, yes. Do you see yourself at 25? And I was like, I don't know. He said, do you see yourself at 40? And I said, no. And that simple exercise was actually profound for me because it gave me this bigger sense of, okay, this can change. So I think that connection, that empathy, that listening is really powerful. But then I wouldn't say anything. I would give that young person an experience of breathing. Because the thing is, we often try to change our mind and our thoughts at the level of the mind, right? We try to shift our way of thinking. And there's cognitive behavioral therapy, and there are many fascinating psychological constructs that have some value, and positive psychology and other things that can be impactful. But the challenge is the mind is very tricky to manipulate at the level of the mind, right? If you have an angry kid and you tell them stop being angry, does it work? Absolutely not. If you are attempting to fall asleep and you tell yourself, go to sleep, does it work? No, we stay wide awake and riveted. But if you do a moment of breathing and suddenly all those thoughts and worries and fears just clear out and you feel yourself in this peaceful centered place, infinite possibility comes back. What's so interesting is when you're down, it only takes 1 moment, 1 second for everything to switch. But when we're feeling it and we're caught in it, it's so overwhelming, it's all consuming, and this is never going to change. But then you use the breath and it changes and you realize, oh my goodness, I actually have power and control over these emotions, these overwhelming emotions that feel like such a burden, that are so hard to shift. To realize that without taking any pill or any substance, and I did so much self-medication, and you feel better for a moment and then you absolutely crash and feel broken, right? And to realize I can just change my breathing and I'm a different person, that's freedom. So a long answer, but.
Now, we talked a lot about public schools and the various issues and the challenges they face. But if you look at private schools, they're not free of their own challenges. In fact, the suicide rates in private schools is actually greater. And yet the students oftentimes have been given all these different privileges. What's going on there that somebody could have so much and have all this privilege and still come to that place? What's going on there, do you think?
There's so much to that one, but it's so real. I mean, I'll take myself for the example. I had all of the privilege of the highest education, right? I can't imagine what the price tag of my education would have been if it was tallied up. I got blessed and got scholarships, but profound investment in these institutions that are incredibly rigorous. And yet nowhere in that space was I ever taught how to manage my mind or how to manage my emotions, or what to do with my stress. It was just push. And I shouldn't just say that blanket. I went to a Quaker school. We had meeting for worship. There was this priceless time that we actually took for reflection, and that was valuable. But that was 1 hour in a week, and then it was back to the hustle, right? So what's at the heart of it? I mean, when we're pushing, when our sense of accomplishment or our sense of identity is externalized, we're vulnerable. It's not fundamentally fulfilling. No amount of accomplishment really ever brings peace or ever brings joy. When your sense of success or peace or contentment is externalized to some factor of how well you do on an exam or what job you get or what other people think of you, and you are so vulnerable, right? Because there's no substance to that. Or there might be for a moment, but it's all ego and it evaporates. And it's this really tenuous relationship with yourself. It's this very broken relationship with yourself. And so when we put our kids in this system that is output oriented, right? How well you do, who you are, meaning what your resume says about you, not who you are in terms of what your heart says about you or what your friends say about you or what your passions are, then we are holding kids to this really kind of sick standard. And it's a dangerous thing. It's not to say that rigorous education isn't beautiful or powerful or doesn't give you tremendous access to information and perspectives. But if it's not also framed with a deep respect of you're enough, you're perfect as you are. You don't need to be XYZ to be loved by me as a parent, to be respected by me as an educator, to be esteemed by society at large. Who you are is enough. If that's not there, then we've totally missed the ball of supporting a human being to grow up into their best selves. And we're also just missing the opportunity in education to teach people how to manage stress in a performance capacity. I happen to know that in addition to working in education for years, you've worked with corporate leaders for many years, right? And we know how to push and achieve in one level, but if we don't teach someone how to manage the mind effectively and how to really reset very quickly and effectively, we're actually capping their capacity to increase performance. Because if you really look at the research, peak performance happens not when you push, but when you can turn off, go to zero, and then re-engage. It's that re-engaging from a calm, centered space that allows for our greatest creativity, our greatest thinking and effort. So this dynamic isn't taught in our best institutions, nor is it taught in our public institutions that should be our best institutions. If we're not giving our best to every child, then we as a society are failing, in my eyes, right? If our public education isn't our priority as a nation, then what are we doing, right? If that's not the place we put our best thinking and our highest investment, then what are we creating for our future, right? Because that is our offering, our invitation to all young people to have this learning. So I'm going beyond the question here, but I think we have to know that there's stress in all education, right? Whether it's the highest performance elite schools or whether it's schools that are deeply under-resourced and need support on all levels, young people have stress, bottom line, as does our whole society. So if we're not addressing it actively and proactively, then we will be paying for it later. We will see those suicide rates continue to increase. There's been a 70% increase in teen suicide in the last 15 years. It directly tracks against the advent of social media. If we don't acknowledge that our kids are facing a totally different paradigm in their lives than we grew up with, then we're also missing the ball. And as they're in this hyper externalized world where they're being judged from every angle, they need tools to come back to themselves and be centered in who they are, not based on others' opinions, not based on any metrics of performance, but just because each of us is perfect. That was a bit of a rant, but you asked. So.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for unpacking that tough question. Now, what is it about Sky Schools that you would say is sustainable? We've had so many different programs, as you know, in education. There's constantly, new fads in education, new pedagogy, different programs. I think you mentioned No Child Left Behind. They come and go. They all promise to reform education. Somehow they fall flat oftentimes, even though we adopt them and then we move on to the next one. What would you say makes this program, Sky Schools, hopeful in terms of its sustainability?
Yeah, and I'll answer in a shorter response this time, but look, it's not about this program uniquely. What Sky Schools does really well is something that other programs can do as well, and that my goal is for education to take on as a whole and it not to be externalized as any program. And what that is a combination of really effective social emotional learning. And there's a right way, in my eyes, to do social emotional learning that is not kind of prescriptive or dogmatic about information on how we can, yes, navigate challenges, right, but is focused in giving kids experiences of dynamics, like having their buttons pushed, and exploring what happens in us in those moments, and then exploring solutions that work for me. Or what does it mean to be 100%? Asking really good questions, letting the young people share their solutions is, for me, the approach to effective social emotional learning. Very interactive, very explorative, but taking the time for that. And the other thing that Sky Schools adds is really unique and powerful stress management tools, right? And there's contemplative practices are gaining a lot of traction. You see mindfulness gaining traction in schools these days, but beyond any of those modalities, neural restorative practices, so practices that really reset the system, are game changers. Just as I was saying before, if we're not giving kids tools to manage their stress and to effectively manage their minds, then we're leaving them so vulnerable, and we're stealing from them what I believe is a birthright of understanding how your physiology works, how your brain works, how your breath works, and knowing that I don't need some external substance or circumstance to bring me the feeling, the joy, the peace, the calm that I'm looking for. So what I'm talking about is education waking up to the fact that these things can be taught, first and foremost, that we can teach these skills, and then making sure that that is a priority, that in every single day, we're taking some time to address the human being. We're taking some time to address the mind where the learning is happening, the emotions that are governing the person in front of us. If we're not taking some time for that, we're not allowing this person to be their best self and their most effective self. And we are going to see that in every element of performance indication, of behavioral metrics, and of their long-term success. The research also shows so clearly, and I'll shut up about it, but that it is the social emotional, it is the soft skills that determine long-term efficacy, whether it's in the corporate world and job performance, whether it's in health metrics, whether it's in happiness and affluence in life. So we need to prioritize those and succeed in delivering them.
Wonderful. So can you share some highlights about Sky Schools and what's happening now?
Yeah, so there's so many highlights. Talking about those metrics I just brought up, we've seen schools have their honor rolls increase from less than 100 kids to over 800 students. We've seen more than 90% reduction in behavioral incidents in students who are most prone to disruptive behavior. We've seen 66% reduction in suspensions in schools. We've seen across the board GPA increases as buildings implement building-wide breath work and practice. But it's also, for me, it's not about those numbers. It's about the joy. When you have superintendents walk into a school and say to the principal, what's going on here? Everybody's happy. That's what I show up for work for. You feel the climate in buildings just totally transform. And we have these schools across the country that are not just teaching social emotional learning. They're not just teaching breath work. They're doing practice every day. They're wrapping support around students so that when a student is going through a behavioral challenge, that there's a restorative opportunity for them to restore themselves instead of just a disciplinary action. We have communities where the parents are learning and they're coming in and working with kids, where all of the teachers have experienced the work and are reinforcing it through the language in their different classes and through taking a moment to do the practices, the breath work before tests, for example. So that huge cultural shift is, for me, the real gratification. I could tell a lot of stories about individual students, but I'm doing a lot of talking. So I'd love to just share a little video, let some of the kids speak for themselves about what this has done for
them. I practice these breaths every day. Like when I want to fall asleep but I can't, I do my straw breath. When I wake up and I want to be energized for school, I do my power breath. It just makes me happy. I love doing my breaths. I love doing everything. I love playing the games. I love my Yes program teachers.
I like the sky treatment. It feels really good to do it because I lost a lot in my family and I didn't know how to deal with my stress. I lost my sister, I lost my grandma, I lost my great-grandpa, and it was really hard. I couldn't stand all the stress, so I would take it out on other people. But since the yoga classes started to help me, I've been doing my straw breaths, my power breaths, and sky breathing and the Om sound. It's helping me really well, and I don't feel much about it anymore because I feel happy, like they're in a better place now. In my past times, I used to hit people and do violent stuff, but now I just don't. I leave it behind.
This affected my life in such a good way and was so beneficial, and I feel like a lot of things changed, and I feel like I have control of myself now, and I have control over my anger, my fear, my sadness, over everything. I even share this with my whole family, with my mom, and now everyone's more like control over themselves, and we're just a better family and all. Someone just tries to get me angry, I just close my eyes and I just do some straw breaths and I'm completely fine. And even if I do that in the morning, I won't get angry as easily, and so I can just be button proof.
I think the course is a really, really good idea. I think it will help with your mind, it'll make you look better, feel better, and live better.
The first time we did our sky breathing meditation, and afterwards I felt like so rested, so focused, and right after that, the school was over and I was going to the library to study. And I went to study and it just felt like everything was so, not necessarily easy, but just came to me a lot faster, and I could work a lot faster and less distractions. I definitely think this is a valuable program for gun students because it does teach you to have empathy, to not let your buttons be pushed, and to just overall be happier, you know? And I think that's really important, especially in our society. Like, it's all about work, 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 but this course teaches you like the tools to just take a breather for a second, you know?
That's wonderful. Now, you mentioned that some of the students actually become teachers of the program. Is that correct?
It is. A number of them have. When I first came in, actually, there was a young man who was one of my guides and mentors. His name was Diego, and he had been through a particularly challenging childhood and a period of his life where he was involved with gangs and all sorts of things, and was actually about to be expelled from his third school. And here is a beautiful picture of him doing a breathing practice. Actually, this was right before he went to class to teach in the first school he was teaching. He graduated from high school and he felt that, and he actually wanted to become an English teacher. And first step was to work with us. And so he came to the East Coast. He was from the West Coast, and he started teaching in New York and Philadelphia. Here he's helping build a garden for students in the school in Philadelphia. Became such a powerful leader. And he actually initiated here he's leading a circle in a community healing project in Oakland. He helped us initiate something called, at that time it was Yes Core. Now we'll be relaunching it as Sky Core, kind of a program for young people to come out of school and do some work with us for a few years sharing this. But whether students become teachers or not, what's so beautiful is while they're in the school to see the level of ownership they take. In many of our schools, what we call model schools across the country, where we do the breathing every day, it's led by the students, right? So the students share this because it works for them. And that's one of the key things that keeps me showing up every day is, right, you can't force a kid to do anything. You're not going to force them to meditate. You're not going to force them to breathe. You're not going to force them to do their homework. You're not going to force them to do anything. But when you give kids tools that really work, or insight that really serves them, then it becomes their own and they cherish it and they will do it and they will share it and they will lead from that space. So when kids experience a simple breathing process that totally changes how they feel in the moment, totally changes their perspective, then they're going to pass it forward. You heard that young woman say so beautifully how she's been sharing it with her family and teaching others. Our elementary school kids teach their parents all the time, right? And it's just beautiful to see kids give something away that has served them. And really, bottom line, I do this work because I didn't get it as a kid, because I needed this so badly when I was young, and it wasn't there for me. And so I just have to share it. And I know that kids will keep sharing this because it works for them.
Yeah. So, Elan, how can schools adopt these programs? How can teens get involved with these programs? How is there a way to reach out or to get involved with this for viewers watching who would like to be a part of it?
Absolutely. So you can go to skyschools.org and see more information about programs for both students, parents, educators. You can find public courses for kids, or you can find information on how to bring it to your school. There's also an email address there if you want to shoot us a note or a question. What I will share is, if you're an educator or a parent and you're interested in bringing this to your school, have an experience, right? Do the work yourself. Go and take we have every week online, we have educator courses and parent programs, and you can come and you can have an experience for yourself of the Sky practice. And it's better than any information we could possibly give you, is for you just to take that moment and see what these tools do for you. And once you have that experience, I almost guarantee you'll be reaching out and asking us how we can help share that with your community. And we'd love to.
Thank you so much for joining us, Elan. It's been great to hear your insights. And for those viewers watching, thank you for joining us. And please don't hesitate to reach out and find out more about the Sky meditation practice that Elan has shared with us today. Have a great day, everyone.